Hello, you're listening to Abstract AF, and I'm Sneha Jaswal. In this episode, we're going to discuss the horror show The Haunting of Bly Manor. Because believe it or not, it's one of the better rated shows on Netflix, quite rare for a horror themed show. In fact, the only reason I finally decided to watch this much talked about show is because I'm on a few Netflix groups and often spot people talking about just how great it is. But guess what? I was extremely disappointed by the end of it and will be listing 10 reasons why this was so annoying. But before I go on a rant about all the things that did not work for me on the show, it's important that we outline a little bit of the plot.
I have a story. A ghost story.
The story of the haunting of Bly Manor is narrated by an old lady who's attending a wedding in an old mansion. The year is 2007, I think, and she decides to tell the guests a ghost story from the 1980s, that of Bly Manor, that was inhabited by two peculiar kids left in the care of their uncle after their parents died. The protagonist of this ghost story is an American teacher who applies for the full-time position of a nanny at Bly Manor, and she soon starts experiencing trouble on the property. Number one of the biggest problems with Bly Manor, which some viewers might disagree on, is the fact that the makers complicate the plot by adding an additional ghost to the story, a ghost that has nothing to do with Bly. So, in the first episode, when Danny Clayton, the American teacher, is in London, she keeps seeing an ominous vision on mirrors, sometimes even in broad daylight, a silhouette of a man with burning eyes. It's pretty clear that Danny Clayton has her own demons to deal with, even before she can get to Bly Manor. Some may argue that it adds more depth to her character. Maybe it does, but it's also very annoying.
I wonder, what's the catch? You're younger than most who'd apply for this sort of thing. What makes a woman of your age want to give up her life to take care of someone else's children? A life in America at that. Full time as well.
Number two, everyone seems to have mental health issues. From the two little kids, Flora and Miles, their uncle who lives in London, to their housekeeper Hannah, to Danny Clayton, their nanny. Almost all of the characters have some serious mental health problems going on. While it's great that mental health is getting center stage in shows like this, the problem is that the story takes place in the 1980s, so none of them is seeing a therapist, and it feels a little too forced. I mean, seriously, everybody in the house is emotionally unstable. They could have set the story in an asylum or something. I remember there was this one scene where a doctor comes into the manor to take a look at the little kid called Flora, and then he informs everybody that everything is fine with her, at least physically. He basically stops short of saying that the kid has other issues. And one wonders why he just does not refer the child to a mental health practitioner. Because on second thoughts, 1980s wasn't such a bad time for therapy or counseling. I mean, it's just 1980s, not the 18th century. Psychotherapy and counseling was not an unknown or unheard practice by then. And trust me, everybody in that house needs a therapist. Well, moving on to number three. It's the pace of the show. It's 9 episodes long, and frankly, it felt like nothing of importance happened in the first 2 episodes at all. The Haunting of Bly Manor is mind numbingly slow.
Nothing ever happens. Nothing happens at all.
Almost nothing ever happens. All the action unfolds in the manor with a limited cast, and they're all just mundane people. If you have a read on what kind of content makes a horror story great, experts usually tell that a good horror story is a one which creates fear of the unknown in the viewer's heart or mind. It keeps you on your toes or makes you dread what is going to happen next. Bly Manor fails to create any sense of dread or fear in the viewer. In fact, the very rare times that a ghost did appear on the screen, I would watch with a bored expression on my face, disappointed with the very little we get as viewers. I usually try and avoid watching shows because I have this horrible problem of wanting to finish the series as soon as possible. So, like a lot of people, I tend to binge watch. For example, I saw the first season of Ginny and Georgia, another very popular Netflix show, in less than one day, and it had a total of 10 episodes. Bly Manor, on the other hand, has 9 episodes, and I took 4 days to finish it because it just didn't create this sense of emergency in the viewer where you feel like you really need to know what is going to happen next. It's so slow that you don't care if you watch the next episode or not.
and nothing ever happens. Nothing happens at all.
Point number 4. Halfway through the series, the makers introduce a very annoying trope called memory hopping or dream hopping. So, what happens is that some of the characters are seen visiting old memories, and it makes it a little hard for both the characters and the viewers to differentiate between what's real and what's imaginary. And while the purpose might have been to confuse the viewers, it's actually just irritating and frustrating. You're already not very happy with the way the show is progressing, and then the makers make the characters visit old memories again and again, each time with just a little detail changed. So you have the same conversations and setting repeated multiple times. And as a viewer, all you can think is it was bad enough that the show was so slow, and now they're repeating things annoying as hell. Which brings me to point number 5. Everybody is either falling in love in this series or having an affair, and it's simply exasperating. At one point, there are 6 adults in the house, including 2 of who are dead, and yet there are 3 couples in between the 6 of them. Get what I mean?
You're my best friend. And I love my life. And I don't know how much time we have left. But however much it is, I want to spend it with you.
In the beginning of this episode, I mentioned how the story of the haunting of the Bly Manor is actually being narrated by someone else, an old lady. And one of the guests tells her how her story is actually a love story and not a ghost story. Here is the thing, if this show is supposed to be a love story, well, it's a very boring one. There is some interesting story material in there, which could have possibly made a good 3-hour film. Usually, the problem with a horror film is the fact that there is not enough time for the viewer to understand the protagonist, so it's hard to sympathize with their plight. But in Bly Manor, there's enough time and enough story to all characters. But instead of sympathizing with the protagonist, you sort of begin to not like them further. And it's actually hard to make out if the actors are bad or it's just a terrible storytelling. Takes an especially bad show to confuse the viewers like that. And that's where I would like to jump to point number 6. It's hard to like the characters because they are so one dimensional. It feels like each of them is pretending to be the main lead in a Shakespearean tragedy, almost always serious, broody, philosophical, and on the verge of having a nervous breakdown. I love the fact that this cast is dominated by women characters, but I absolutely hate the fact that their personalities are completely circled around their love interest. It's like their life and death depends upon the person they want to go to bed with. And this is probably a personal pet peeve, but it really pisses me off when intelligent women are reduced to heartbroken idiots. Like there is nothing more to life. In the 9 hours of this show, you get to know nothing about Danny Clayton beyond the fact that she likes kids and sees ghosts. She seems to have no hobbies, no ambitions, and no dreams. I mean, of course, she has the nightmares, so I guess she doesn't have the time to dream. Which brings me to point number 7. The makers give every character a detailed backstory, which was absolutely unnecessary. For example, the uncle who lives in London gets way more screen time than he deserves, and all of it was just one big headache to watch. One of the negative characters, called Peter Quint, also gets his own backstory, almost as if the creators try to reason why he is the way he is. Basically, there is too much over explaining in the show, so much so that a viewer can second guess 8 of the 10 things that are going to happen, killing all possible suspense. Point number 8 is sort of an extension of the earlier reasons, and that's the fact that there are very long conversations between the characters. They are like philosophical monologues that are oh so boring. An interaction that could have been done in 1 minute goes on for 5 minutes. I'll be honest, I fast forwarded those bits. Like, do we really need a 4 minute monologue to explain to us that death is inevitable, that everybody is going to die someday and we cannot do anything about it? That too in a horror show? I don't think so.
Look, I know you're struggling. I see it. I know you're carrying this guilt around. But I also know that you don't decide who lives and who doesn't. Sorry, Danny, but you don't. Humans are organic. It's a fact. We're meant to die.
Also, these long conversations drain any excitement that could have been used to build up to a scene that was meant to scare the viewers a little. Point number 9, there are a lot of inconsistencies in the plot that might begin to irk the viewer. For example, one ghost can touch and move things around, while some other ghosts cannot do it. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, why do some ghosts have more powers than other ghosts? This lopsided power dynamics within the ghost realms is not just unfair, it's stupid and silly. And we never get an explanation. Coming to the last point, the 10th reason and the biggest reason why any horror fan will absolutely hate this show is the fact that it does not have enough ghosts. Despite the fact that there are actually multiple of them appearing through the plot. 9 hours of Bly Manor, and if you can count the total ghost time, or at least the total time of the ghosts being creepy, it would probably not be more than 9 minutes. It might be a nice change, the fact that the director does not rely on the classic jump scares where you suddenly raise the volume to shock the viewer, but the thing is, the director does close to nothing to scare the viewer. The story is too flat, and the very little interesting story twist that Blind Manor does have is saved for the second last episode, and by then you're too frustrated to give a damn. It's on episode number 8 that we have finally explained what the problem with this mansion is and who exactly is haunting it. The history is sort of interesting, but not enough to like the show. So, yeah, those are all the problems I had with the show. You can totally skip it. And if you're scared of the horror genre, then you can actually gather some courage and watch it because it probably won't scare you. That's all for this episode. Talk to you in the next one.